Hello, and welcome to Doc Lanew's Storytime. I am Doc Lanew. Today's story is Visiting John by Hezokuai Jenkins. In this story, the narrator is a time traveler who is trying to save John Lennon from being assassinated in 1980. Let's discover if he does save John Lennon. Now, let's get to the story. Visiting John by Hezokuai Jenkins. When time travel was finally perfected, the first thing anyone did was to try and prevent the Second World War Holocaust by going back in time and killing Hitler. And they learned rather quickly, however, every science fiction writer basically ever was correct in assuming any attempt to change the past would cause unimaginable changes in the present, often causing more harm than good. The first attempt to kill Hitler was a success as far as pulling off the assassination. However, the backlash was that the leftover Nazi regime retaliated with a massive campaign of revenge and caused far more deaths than ever had caused originally. So after going back in time again to undo as they had done, the second attempt was to go back to when Hitler was a baby, the idea being to kill him before he even created the Nazi Party. Well, as it turns out, running around turn of the century Europe attempting to kill babies was not an easy task. History, after all, does not record every moment in the life for a time traveler to know exactly where he would be and when. For a short while after, there was several more plans, including having someone to go back to encourage him to focus on his paintings instead of politics. And the most far-reaching of all the plans included the attempt to assassinate the author of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was originally a social-political satire that was plagiarized and rewritten as a real document that outlined a Jewish conspiracy to rule the world. Hitler was given a copy while in prison and supposedly not realizing it was fiction. It helped to solidify his anti-Semitic views, thinking if Hitler never read the book, he never would have become so vehemently anti-Semitic. All of these simply failed, made no difference at all, or made everything worse, with all of these disturbances to the very fabric of space-time itself. It did not take long for the scientific community to take notice, and as the initial classified activities of the time travelers began to leak into the public view, triggering various protests from any number of pro- and anti-Zionists alike, government regulations became necessary. A complex system of rules and regulations regarding what a time traveler could and could not do was pushed through Congress in a matter of days and essentially banned anyone from engaging in any activity at all. We were simply allowed to observe historic events, and the years that followed the regulations stayed the same, but the level of enforcement waned. It was within the period of the government indifference that I began my visits. Traveling back in time to change something as large as the Second World War had been proven time and time again to cause ripples in space-time that could not be ignored in the present, and so I felt I had to find something much smaller in overall scale, yet important enough to take the risk. Myself being foolish, stubborn, and naive at the time, I decided that perhaps it could work if I instead kill someone. I would try and save someone. I would go back in time and prevent the murder of John Lennon. This was a dangerous undertaking, even with the government's recent laxness in their enforcement efforts. One still could get caught and end up in federal prison. So I devised a plan that I felt would cause, instead of one large ripple in space-time, many smaller, such more difficult to spot ones. And so it began. Liverpool, England, October 9th, 1951. John's 11th birthday. Arriving in the neighborhood I knew he grew up in, I thought he would be quite easy to find. Being a Tuesday, I would simply hang out in the general area of his school and find him on his way to class. My plan was really quite simple. I would just be there. I wouldn't speak to him or anything. Just be present. He would see me as a person sees all kinds of people every day. That is, his birthday was important, as it would be more than just another meaningless day. So the events of the day would be more memorable. I would continue in a similar manner, going back to each of his birthdays. I, living from the same moment in time, would always have the same clothes, and I would stay the same age. Eventually he would have to notice that every year on his birthday, the same mysterious man would appear. Once he became a beetle, I would increase the frequency of my visits, as during that period of his exact location at any given time is for the most part very well documented. I would still pick important events as the best times to appear to him. The Cavern Club, the Ed Sullivan Club show, the Shea Stadium were the most important and the most difficult to pull off. Luckily, as time travel is quite literally space-time travel, I could appear, for example, in the Ed Sullivan studio without having to figure a way to get my hands on a front row ticket. However, being one of the biggest events in the history of television, security was tight and they were checking everyone. It took several attempts, learning from trial and error, until I was able to find a way to simply be there long enough to make sure John saw me. Ultimately, John would come to recognize me, and these visits were meant to build up to a visit during his trip to study transcendental meditation in India. This was when he was most open-minded, the soul-searching. I would appear, he would recognize me, and so would not simply write me off as an annoying fan or some crazy hippie. He would know there was something special about me and would therefore actually take the time to listen to what I had to say, and would believe it. I would tell him who I was and explain that I could not tell him exactly why I was there. After all, I was trying to change the past without any of the known negative consequences, and telling a man the date of his death almost 13 years in advance for almost a guarantee there would be no problems. But to let him know that someday, years from now, he would be in New York and I would be there too, and to please no matter I say at the time, just to do as I say. Then I would make my final visit in New York City, about 100 feet from the spot he was murdered. I would show up and prevent the murder. I will have already called the police, anonymously from the local payphone, and then I would approach Chapman, subdue him, and wait for the police to come and arrest the would-be attacker. I had it all planned out. I tried to anticipate every possible scenario. I knew that Chapman did not resist arrest at all, so assumed would not fight me. I was simply going to be a random person walking by. Just as I passed him, I would turn and grab him from behind. Knowing, of course, that he was armed, I would be wearing a bulletproof jacket. I would save John Lennon and make the world of the future, my world, a better place. That was my plan. I should have listened to John Lennon myself when he sang, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." He was right. The majority of the visits went according to plan, with only the occasional snags during the more prominent Beatles events. Then it was to India, when I finally spoke to him. In my mind, the conversation was going to be a pleasant discussion of the future of music and the impact Lennon had in the world even in the 23rd century. I would prove I was a time traveler by showing him entire record collections resides in my pocket, and my headphones were tiny. I would play music for him that was written after he died. He would be amazed, enlightened, and thrilled by what I had shown him, gaining a new optimistic view of the future. But I would also show him the dark side. I would explain the reasons I came was because in the future, although there was a handful of good bands, most music in pre-programmed computer-generated drum and bass sounds with AI singing laid over, or samples of the old music. The music of his era, mostly just a hook with singing laid over it. Furthermore, I would explain the singers themselves would not have to actually be talented at all. The computers would also auto-tune programming to make even horrible singers sound great, and lip-syncing on stage had become not only acceptable, but the norm. So singers would only have to be good looking. There would be no band, just a DJ, if that, and perhaps background dancers. All of this, I would explain, was what made a time traveler feel it was necessary to come back in time to speak with a real songwriter from a real band. As I had mentioned before, as risky as this all was, I would dare not risk telling him the real reason for my visit. So I explained it all in terms of its impact on the music of the future and focused mainly on the positive results in the 60s hippie movement, equal right laws, the end of Vietnam, appearing as though I had come to encourage him to continue his current path. The reality of the situation, however, was nothing like that at all. I appeared near the camp where the Beatles and the rest of the group were staying, waiting for a moment when John was alone to approach him. John did not greet me with open arms, but with fear and trepidation. When I spoke to him, he was immediately shocked, and looked at me as though I were a ghost. I quickly told him to relax and assured him I was harmless. It took a long while to gain his trust, which was given only partially and with great reluctance. He would not wear the headphones, as earbuds appeared quite dangerous to him. Not fully understanding his point of view at the time, I realized now I was asking him to stick two unknown small electronic devices attached to a wire into his ears. Eventually, I was able to convince him I was from the future by showing him how I would use my phone to take photos. I tried to stick to my original plan as much as I could, but he kept asking me questions I could not or I dared not answer, and all the while looking for an excuse to politely get as far away from me as he could. Getting the message, I made my final statement predicting how I would appear to him again in the future one last time, and to please listen to me when that time comes. He agreed flippantly and then quickly rejoined the others, muttering "nutter" as he walked away. Though not quite what I had in mind, nothing in life ever really goes the way you imagine it, and I did manage to plant the seeds for my final visit. So I went ahead as planned. Next stop, the Dakota, December 8th, 1980, New York City. I arrived at 10:30 p.m., 19 minutes before the time of the murder. Chapman was not there. I looked for a payphone, assuming they were literally everywhere back in those days. Apparently they were not. 10:35, no Chapman. 10:40, 10:45, 11 p.m. 11 minutes after the murder, no Chapman, no Lennon, no Ono. I began to fear my visit to India has changed something after all. This was not at all what was supposed to happen. I traveled back to my own time. As soon as I arrived home, I did a search for the history of John Lennon. I did succeed in stopping the murder, but what I caused instead, well, it seems that my previous visits had disturbed him deeply his whole life. Having grown up without his father, a mysterious man appearing to him always on important days in his life had him sometimes believing he was seeing some kind of spirit sent by his father to watch him over him. Other times believing that he had imagined it all, convincing himself it was a recurring dream. When I arrived in India, I was correct in thinking it was the most open-minded time in his life, but it was also his most psychological vulnerable. His already fragile psyche, made even more so by my visits, broke that day. His friends at first thought that he was joking, but he insisted it was real. He became obsessed with it. I failed to take into account also the fact that he was still grieving the recent death of Brian Epstein, just as I had arrived. His failing marriage, had burgeoning relationship with Yoko Ono, all were weighing heavy upon him. And then I showed up, the proverbial straw that broke the back, as it were. The Beatles broke up soon after. Let Be and Abbey Road no longer existed, and John had now become legendary as a casualty on par with Syd Barrett. The main difference, however, is that Syd lived his life after Pink Floyd quietly in his home, while John's life after the Beatles had a constant battle with addiction, spent mostly in rehab facilities and mental institutions. He died alone in the mid-1990s. The fact that the song Imagine no longer existed itself was reason enough for the FBI to seek me out. Following standard procedures, they went back to before I left for my first visit and arrested me then. It was always difficult for them to get a conviction on someone for doing something that hadn't been done yet, but the complexity of the computer records were sophisticated enough and my lawyer crafty enough to ensure I would receive the maximum penalty. In the end, the entire time travel industry took a massive hit, being banned outright in several states. There are still those who argue that we travelers have caused enough rifts in the space-time continuum itself to justify a global ban on time travel. Myself, I gave up on it altogether, having found that focusing on changing the past instead of learning from it only serves to lead one to miss out on what they have in the present. The end. Thank you for watching. If you have short stories, poems, art, or music that you would like featured on this channel, please email it to j.lanu.stories@gmail.com. Click on the icon to the left for a previous episode. Click on the icon on the right to subscribe to my channel. And always, please like, comment, and share this video. Until next time, take care of yourself.